In the late 19th century, something unusual began appearing in museum collections and private galleries across Europe and North America. They were not statues in the usual sense, they were not masks, nor were they simple decorative carvings. These objects were shaped like human skulls carved from clear or milky quartz crystal, smooth, heavy, cold to the touch, and strangely lifelike. Today they are often grouped together under one name, the crystal skulls. The earliest confirmed record takes us to London in 1897. That year, the British Museum acquired a life-sized crystal skull from the famous New York jeweler Tiffany & Company. The museum's records state that Tiffany claimed the object came from Mexico. At the time, interest in ancient Mesoamerican civilizations was growing rapidly. Archaeological expeditions were uncovering temples, carved stelae, and stone monuments connected to the Aztec and Maya cultures. So when a finely carved skull said to be from Mexico appeared on the market, it did not seem impossible. Around the same period, another crystal skull entered the collection of what is now the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. Like the British Museum example, it was said to have ties to ancient Mexico. Both skulls were carved from quartz crystal, shaped to resemble human anatomy, with hollow eye sockets, defined teeth, and smooth surfaces that reflected light in a striking way. But there was a problem. Neither skull came with excavation records. There were no field notes, no drawings from archaeological digs, no photographs showing them being uncovered from ancient ruins. They arrived through art dealers and collectors, not through controlled archaeological discoveries. At first, that gap did not raise as many concerns as it would today. In the late 1800s, archaeology was still developing as a scientific discipline. Standards for documenting discoveries were not as strict as they are now. Museums often relied on dealers' claims about where an object came from. If a piece looked ancient and matched a known culture in style, it was often accepted. Then, in the early 20th century, the most famous crystal skull of all entered the story. This one would later be known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull. According to a popular account told decades later, it was discovered in the 1920s at the Maya site of Lubantun in present-day Belize. The story says that Anna Mitchell-Hedges, the adopted daughter of British adventurer Frederick Mitchell-Hedges, found the skull beneath a collapsed altar during excavations. She was reportedly just a teenager at the time. The image is powerful, a lost Maya city hidden in the jungle, and a crystal skull emerging from ancient stone. It is a compelling story, but when historians looked closely at the records, they found something different. Frederick Mitchell-Hedges did take part in expeditions to Lubantun in the 1920s. However, detailed excavation reports and diaries from those digs do not mention the discovery of a crystal skull. More importantly, documents from a London auction house show that a crystal skull matching the description was sold at Sotheby's in 1943. The buyer was Frederick Mitchell-Hedges. There is no verified record placing the skull in Belize in the 1920s. Instead, the paper trail begins in Europe in the 1940s. This is where the mystery shifts. It is no longer about lost temples or hidden chambers. It becomes a question of provenance, the documented history of an object's ownership. Without excavation records, it becomes difficult to connect any of the crystal skulls directly to ancient Maya or Aztec sites. Still, the idea that these skulls could be ancient captured public imagination. Quartz is a very hard mineral. On the Mohs scale of hardness, it ranks at 7 out of 10. It cannot be easily carved with simple stone tools. Creating a life-sized skull with smooth curves and detailed teeth would require patience, skill, and effective tools. Some early promoters argued that such precision must have required advanced knowledge, perhaps even lost techniques. By the mid-20th century, books and exhibitions began presenting the crystal skulls as relics of forgotten civilizations. Writers suggested they might hold hidden knowledge or represent sacred objects used in ancient rituals. These ideas were not supported by archaeological field evidence, but they spread widely in popular culture. What is important to understand is this: no verified crystal skull has ever been documented in a controlled archaeological excavation tied to a known pre-Columbian layer. Not in Mexico, not in Belize, not anywhere in Mesoamerica. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of authentic Maya and Aztec artifacts: carved stone monuments, jade masks, obsidian blades, painted ceramics. As these objects were found in temples, tombs, and ritual caches, carefully recorded and studied. Yet among all of those discoveries, no crystal skull has emerged from a scientifically documented dig. That absence is not dramatic, it is quiet, but it matters. The skulls themselves are real objects. They are carved from genuine quartz crystal. They weigh several pounds and show detailed craftsmanship. The British Museum skull, for example, is slightly smaller than a real human skull, but remarkably precise in shape. The Mitchell-Hedges skull is even more refined, with a separate lower jaw carved from the same type of crystal, designed to fit together smoothly. They exist. They can be examined. They can be measured and tested. What remains uncertain is their true origin. By the time these skulls entered museum collections, interest in Mesoamerican art was high. European workshops were also skilled in gemstone carving. In Germany, especially in the town of Idar Oberstein, craftsmen had access to imported Brazilian quartz and advanced lapidary tools. The global art market of the late 1800s was active and competitive. Museums were eager to display striking objects from ancient cultures. It is within this historical context that the crystal skulls rose to fame. The central tension is not about supernatural powers or hidden energies. It is about documentation. If these skulls are truly ancient, why is there no solid archaeological record showing where they were found? Why do they appear first in dealer catalogues and auction houses rather than excavation reports? And if they are modern creations, how did they become accepted, even briefly, as artifacts of ancient civilizations? Those questions linger quietly behind the glass cases where some of these skulls are displayed today. They shine under museum lights, reflecting the faces of visitors who lean closer for a better look. The mystery of the crystal skulls is not carved into the stone temples of the Maya. It is written in shipping invoices, auction records, and missing field notes. It lives in the space between claim and evidence. And as we move forward, focus shifts from dramatic discovery stories to careful scientific testing. Because if the truth is hidden anywhere, it will not be found in legend, but in the marks left behind on crystal itself. By the early 2000s, the mystery of the crystal skulls had shifted away from dramatic discovery stories and into laboratory rooms filled with microscopes and bright white lights. For decades, the skulls had been displayed behind glass, admired and debated. Now, researchers wanted something more solid than legend. They wanted physical evidence. At the British Museum in London, curators worked with scientists to re-examine the crystal skull they had acquired back in 1897. Around the same time, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., began studying a similar skull that had been anonymously donated in 1992. This particular skull had also been described as ancient Mesoamerican, possibly Aztec. What had changed was technology. Using scanning electron microscopes, researchers could now magnify the surface of the crystal thousands of times. Tiny grooves, scratches, and polishing marks that were invisible to the naked eye became clear. These marks tell a story. Every tool leaves behind a pattern. Stone tools grind differently than metal wheels. Hand sanding leaves irregular lines. Mechanical carving leaves smoother, repeating arcs. When scientists examined the British Museum's skull, they noticed curved grooves consistent with the use of rotary wheels. These are tools powered by steady rotation, often used in modern lapidary workshops. The marks were uniform and precise. They did not match the rougher, more varied patterns seen in confirmed pre-Columbian stone carvings. In 2008, the British Museum and the Smithsonian published their findings in a joint study titled Objects of Intrigue. The conclusion was careful but clear. The tool marks on the skulls were consistent with modern carving techniques, likely from the 19th century. There was no evidence showing that the skulls had been shaped using ancient Mesoamerican tools. This was a major turning point. Quartz is a very hard mineral. Ancient Mesoamerican craftsmen were skilled at carving jade, obsidian, and other stones. They used sand abrasives and hand tools, often working patiently over long periods of time. Their finished pieces show certain known characteristics: slight asymmetries, varied surface textures, and tool marks consistent with manual grinding. The crystal skulls, however, displayed features that suggested something else. High-speed rotary tools leave microscopic traces that are difficult to fake. Under magnification, those traces become almost like fingerprints. There was more. Scientists also looked for signs of aging. If a crystal skull had been buried for centuries in soil, it would likely show traces of mineral deposits, soil particles, or chemical changes from long contact with the environment. Researchers tested for such residues. They found none that confirmed long-term burial in an archaeological layer. That absence does not automatically prove a recent origin. Quartz is durable and can survive harsh conditions, but when combined with the tool mark evidence and the lack of excavation records, the case for an ancient origin grew weaker. Attention then turned to Europe, especially to a small German town called Idar Oberstein. In the 19th century, this town was known as a center for gemstone carving. Craftsmen there had access to imported Brazilian quartz and advanced cutting tools. Historical records show that by the late 1800s, Idar Oberstein workshops were producing detailed carvings for the international art market. Researchers began to see a pattern. The crystal skulls appeared in European collections during a time when European workshops had both the skill and the materials to produce them. At the same time, interest in ancient Mexico and Central America was growing. Museums were eager to acquire impressive artifacts. Private collectors were willing to pay high prices. It is possible that some skulls were created as artistic pieces and later marketed as ancient. In other cases, dealers may have exaggerated their origins to increase their value. There is historical evidence that art dealers in the late 19th century sometimes misrepresented objects to make them more appealing to buyers. But it is important to be careful here. There is no single document that clearly states this crystal skull was carved in Germany in 1875. Instead, the conclusion is based on a combination of toolmark analysis, trade records, and the timeline of when the skulls first appeared. And there is one more complication. Quartz cannot be carbon dated. Carbon dating works only on organic materials that were once alive. Crystal is a mineral. It formed deep within the earth millions of years ago. That means scientists cannot directly measure when the carving itself took place. They must rely on indirect evidence. The marks left by tools, the historical paper trail, and the context in which the object appeared. Today, most major museums are open about this shift in understanding. The British Museum labels its crystal skull as likely a 19th century European creation. The Smithsonian does the same with the skull in its collection. They do not present them as ancient Aztec or Maya artifacts. Still, the mystery is not completely erased. There are lingering questions about how these objects were accepted for so long. Why did respected institutions initially display them as ancient without deeper testing? Part of the answer lies in the time period. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, archaeology was still becoming a science. Standards for documenting provenance were not as strict as they are today. Museums often relied on dealer claims and visual comparison. There is also the human factor. Striking objects capture attention. A life-sized skull carved from clear crystal is unforgettable. It feels rare and important. When something looks ancient and mysterious, people often want it to be ancient and mysterious. That desire can shape assumptions even in academic settings. Over time, books and documentaries amplified the legend. The skulls became linked to ideas about lost knowledge and forgotten civilizations. But when placed under the microscope, literally, the story became more grounded. The real mystery now is not about hidden powers or secret rituals. It is about how an object can move through history, changing identity along the way. A carved crystal skull may have begun as a 19th century artwork. Through dealer claims, museum displays, and popular writing, it became something else, an icon of unexplained history. And in that transformation we see something deeply human. The crystal skulls remind us that mysteries are not always buried in ruins or hidden beneath ancient temples. Sometimes they are created through gaps in records, through assumptions, and through the powerful pull of a good story. Science did not erase the skulls, it simply reframed them. They remain fascinating objects, they remain carefully crafted works of art, but today they stand as examples of how history, commerce, and belief can intertwine. In the end, the crystal skulls are unexplained in a different way than many expected, not because they come from a lost civilization, but because they reveal how easily the line between artifact and myth can blur, and how long it can take for careful research to bring that line back into focus.